Swarmlord. It has died more times than most Tyranid hive fleets have names, and it always comes back. The Swarmlord is not a creature, it is a weapon the hive mind reaches for only when everything else has failed. Built on the hive tyrant strain, but pushed past it into something else entirely, the Swarmlord is the single most powerful synapse creature the hive mind has ever spawned, and it is as old as the Tyranid species itself. Every other Tyranid organism is grown, used, and discarded. The Swarmlord is different. When it falls in battle, the hive mind does not simply grow a replacement. It rebuilds the same mind with the same memories, the same scars, the same grudges, inside a new body, on any hive fleet in the galaxy, transcending the physical distance that normally separates one fleet from another entirely. It has more independence from the hive mind than any other bioform alive, which is exactly why the hive mind trusts it with the moments that matter most. Think about what that actually means for the species fighting it. Every other enemy commander in the galaxy can be killed and stay dead. Every campaign against the Tyranids has to assume the opposite. The Swarmlord has destroyed empires and driven entire civilizations to extinction over untold millennia of warfare, and each time it falls, it comes back not weaker, but sharper, carrying forward every tactic that failed and every weapon that almost worked. It is, in a very real sense, the only named individual the Tyranids have. Every other bioform is biomass. The Swarmlord is a career. It carries 4 bone sabers, crystalline cord blades that cut through adamantium and force fields like they aren't there. It only emerges when conventional hive tyrants fail, when ordinary warriors can't coordinate a response fast enough, when the swarm's usual answer of brute adaptation simply isn't cutting it. That threshold matters because it means the hive mind, for all its incomprehensible scale, apparently can't simply take direct personal control of every battle. It needs an intermediary, a general it can trust with its own voice, and the Swarmlord is the only creature in its arsenal built for that job. It is, in essence, what a hive tyrant would become if you let it keep learning forever, and that comparison is the whole point. A hive tyrant to a termagant is already terrifying. The Swarmlord is to a hive tyrant what a hive tyrant is to a termagant, another full tier of horror stacked on top of the last one. It has fought Space Marine chapter masters and nearly won. At Colovan, Orte and Cassius of the Ultramarines cut it down, and the hive mind simply grew it again aboard a hive ship in orbit, memories intact, ready for the next war. At the devastation of Baal, it led Hive Fleet Leviathan against the Blood Angels, and it took Commander Dante himself, one of the oldest and most decorated warriors in the Imperium, to put it down. It has traded blows with Marneus Calgar, and nearly killed him too. The Imperium has given it a dozen names over the centuries because nobody agrees on what it actually is. The Tyrant Lord of the Hive Mind, the Herald of the Great Devourer, the Destroyer of the Kala Empire, a civilization that no longer exists because the Swarmlord decided it shouldn't. Unlike an ordinary hive tyrant, which is simply grown, deployed, and recycled back into biomass when the fighting is done, the Swarmlord's rebirth only triggers under very specific conditions, when the standard Tyranid playbook of adaptation in overwhelming numbers has already failed once. That means its resurrection isn't automatic. It's a judgment call made by an intelligence so vast that it apparently can't be everywhere at once, which is a strange thing to say about a mind that spans a galaxy. Here's the part that should worry you. The Swarmlord isn't the hive mind's default response to a threat. It's the response for threats standard tactics can't solve. Every time you see the Swarmlord on a battlefield, that means the hive mind already tried something simpler, and it didn't work. Killing it doesn't end it, it only delays it. Death, for the Swarmlord, is a minor inconvenience with a body count attached. The Avatar of Khaine. At the smoldering heart of every Asuryani, Craftworld stands an iron statue, and once a year, the Eldari choose someone to die so that it can wake up. That someone is the current champion of that Craftworld's aspect shrines, the single greatest living warrior the Eldari have to offer, handed over willingly. That person is called the Young King, and the ritual that kills them is called the Awakening. Nobody knows what happens to the Young King's soul afterward. The Eldari don't ask. What rises from the ritual chamber is a towering figure of molten metal, thick red gore dripping from one fiery hand, the other gripping the wailing doom. A weapon of living god stuff that screams when it tastes flesh and can burn enemies down at range with bolts of raw psychic fire. This is Khaine, the bloody-handed god of war, wearing a body of superheated iron with a core of actual lava, Runes from the ancient Eldari lexicon writhe across the surface of the Wailing Doom itself, as if they're struggling to escape the heat of the god's own grip. The Wailing Doom isn't a normal weapon at all. It's described as a literal manifestation of the god, a splinter of divine power given an edge. On the battlefield, the Avatar doesn't just fight. Its presence floods the surrounding Eldari with memories of their species' lost glory, and a bloodlust none of them can fully control, turning disciplined warriors into something closer to berserkers for as long as their god is standing among them. The Eldari don't take the decision to wake him lightly. It can take the Exarchs hours or days of ritual just to rouse the statue at all, and when it finally rises, roaring, molten, and unstoppable, there's no telling whether the young king sacrificed to wake it has been absorbed into Khaine or simply erased. Nobody who has performed the ritual has ever come back to explain which. But here's where it gets interesting. Khaine used to be whole. During the fall of the Eldari, when the newborn chaos god Slaanesh tore through the Imperium, devouring an entire pantheon, Khaine was the only god who fought back and survived. He didn't win. Slaanesh shattered him instead of finishing him off, simply because she was too spent from consuming his brothers and sisters to land the killing blow. His essence scattered across every surviving craft world, and from each fragment, an avatar can be called. That means every avatar you see is not a copy of a god. It's a literal piece of one. On the tabletop, the current incarnation can dump enough damage into a single target to one-shot a titan. In the lore, it takes the personal intervention of Chaos's mightiest servants to bring one down at all. The Primarch Lorgar himself once faced what remained of an avatar on the dead craft world Zulasa, and even that fight was framed as a battle against the shattered leftovers of the god, not the whole of him, because the whole of Khaine, scattered across every surviving craft world in the galaxy, has never once been in the same place at the same time. A being that requires a demigod and an army just to fight a fragment of it is not simply a god of war. It's the god of war. Hit the like and subscribe button to see more videos like this. Leave a comment on your favorite being from this list. Let's get back into the video. The Void Dragon. Somewhere beneath the red sand of Mars, in a chamber called the Noctis Labyrinth, something ancient is sleeping. And the entire Adeptus Mechanicus has been built around not waking it up. Tech priests call it the Machine God. Some believe it's the literal source of the Omnissiah they worship. The truth, hidden behind 10,000 years of ritual and half-remembered myth, is that it may be Megalodroth, the Void Dragon, widely regarded as the single most powerful C'tan to survive the ancient war in heaven. The story goes that long before the Imperium existed, a lone rider in golden armor met a beast with scales like liquid mercury and a chest that glowed with the light of devoured stars. They fought near the city of Cyrene on ancient Terra, in a myth that reads more like a fairy tale than a war record. A knight on a black charger, a silver lance, a red and white banner bearing an eagle clutching a lightning bolt. The rider found a single weak point beneath the creature's left wing, drove a blade into it, and bound the beast with chains of pure psychic will. That rider would become the Emperor of Mankind. The beast was carried to Mars and sealed away, and the surviving accounts describe it in terms that line up disturbingly well with what we know about the C'tan, a being that devours stars, whose body ripples like the living metal called necrodermis, and whose breast shines with the light of every star it has ever consumed. It's worth pausing on how unusual that story is. The Emperor has crossed blades with Primarchs, Demon Princes, and the Void Dragon's own kin, and almost none of those fights get remembered as a fair contest. This one does. Accounts describe him treating the dragon as a genuine, dangerous equal, someone he had to outthink as much as outfight, which is not a description the Emperor earns from very many opponents in 10,000 years of recorded history. Nobody in the Imperium can say for certain the Dragon of Mars and the Void Dragon are the same entity, because nobody who has seen it has lived to file a full report. What they do have are the Guardians of the Dragon, a hereditary order that somehow shares fragments of the creature's own memories. And those memories describe a chamber deep in the Noctis Labyrinth ringed with silver machines older than the Mechanicus itself, feeding beams of raw energy into a sarcophagus of gold and adamantium. The Void Dragon's own signature ability, unique even among the C'tan, is technokinesis, the capacity to create and reshape technology directly. The warp-suppressing Blackstone pylons still used by the Necrons today are said to be its design. In 998, M41, Necron cruisers launched a suicide assault straight at the mountain hiding it. Nobody knows if they meant to free it or make sure it stayed buried. What we do know is this: of all the star-devouring gods the ancient Necrontyr ever worshipped, the Void Dragon is the one every source agrees you do not want to wake up. The Nightbringer. Every species in the galaxy that fears death is, in some small way, afraid of this thing specifically. The Nightbringer was the first Ceton the Necrontyr ever pulled into the material universe, and it liked what it found. It fed on an entire star just to test its new body, then turned its attention to the Necrontyr's enemies, the Old Ones, during the war in heaven, and kept going long after the war needed it to stop. Whole regions of space were stripped of life, not for strategy, but because the Nightbringer was hungry. Its image, a towering hooded reaper wreathed in dark light, became so deeply carved into the minds of the species that survived it that it is quite literally the reason so many cultures across the galaxy picture death the same way: cloaked, scything, patient. Even the Necrontyr's own allies, the servant races of the Old Ones, learned to fear death specifically because of what the Nightbringer had shown them it looked like. When the war in heaven finally ground to a halt, it wasn't because anyone defeated the Nightbringer. A plague called the Enslaver Crisis forced every surviving Ceton into stasis tombs to wait for the galaxy to fill back up with living things worth eating. And the Necrons, the servants who used to worship these star gods, rose up and shattered them into more easily controlled shards rather than let them wake at full strength again. That single decision is the only reason anyone in the 41st millennium has ever fought a Nightbringer and survived. It carries a weapon called the Phase Scythe, or at least it used to carry one everywhere. During a battle with the Eldari war god Khaine, the Phase Scythe was banished into the warp itself, a place the Nightbringer, like all Ceton, cannot follow. That single loss is the closest thing this entity has to a weakness, and it still fights with a blade instead. The Ceton feed on more than souls in the abstract too. Flavorless power from a distant star was enough to sustain the Nightbringer the moment it was first pulled into a body, and the delight it took in the terror of its own worshippers was, according to the record, the very first sign that something had gone wrong with the arrangement. In the 41st millennium, Ultramarines, Captain Uriel Ventress faced a shard of it twice, once nearly burying it under 50 million years of orbital bombardment, and once defeating it outright with the combined might of the Mechanicum, the Imperial Guard, and Titans of the Legio Asterum. It took his old comrade Pausanias standing beside him both times. Notice what that force list actually says. It took an entire coordinated war effort, army scale, to bring down a single fragment of a being that isn't even considered the strongest of its kind. Compare that to the Void Dragon, subdued by one man alone. Same category of monster. Two completely different kinds of fight. The Nightbringer doesn't just kill you, it's the reason you're afraid of dying in the first place. The Deceiver. Mephetron doesn't fight you. It doesn't need to. Every other Ceton on this list wins through raw destruction. The Deceiver wins through conversation. Millions of years ago, it approached the ruling council of the dying Necrontyr and offered them a gift, biotransference, the chance to leave their short, frail organic bodies behind and live forever inside shells of living metal. When the Necrontyr first encountered it, they were so awestruck by its abilities that they gave it a name meaning the messenger, believing it had come to bridge the gap between their people and the star gods. The Silent King Surek listened. The Necrontyr agreed. And in doing so, they erased their own emotions, their own compassion, their own selves, becoming the soulless Necrons that still march across the galaxy today. That wasn't a side effect. That was the plan. It was the Deceiver, too, that whispered the Necrontyr into war against the Old Ones in the first place, feeding their resentment of a species that lived longer and knew more, until hatred did the rest of the work for it. Even the other Ceton didn't trust it, and that says something, considering what the other Ceton are. The Deceiver was also the first Cetan to slip its stasis tomb and walk free in the modern Imperium, active for standard years before the Nightbringer ever woke. Across its long, quiet campaign, it has worn dozens of names in dozens of cultures: Artemora, Sathsarion, Haramok, and it has burned through entire civilizations as disposable tools. It once talked an entire primitive species called the Sylvae into worshipping it, then abandoned them the moment they stopped being useful. It's been theorized to have engineered humanity's pariah gene, the trait behind the anti-psychic blanks, as one more long game in a species it hasn't finished manipulating yet. On the world of Serenade, a shard of it spent lifetimes wearing the body of a Necron overlord, quietly pulling strings until it lured two of the setting's most dangerous minds, Trazyn, the Infinite, and Orica Khan, the Diviner, into freeing it. That shard turned out to be 5 or 6 Citan fused into one, among the most powerful ever recorded, and it still took transforming Orican into a being of pure light just to put it back down. Elsewhere, another shard has spent years quietly steering the Alpha Legion toward rebuilding ancient Necron pylons, working toward a scheme to seal the galaxy-spanning warp rift called the Psychiatrix Maledictum, and to trick humanity into repeating the exact same bargain that doomed the Necrontyr in the first place. A failed Imperial assassination attempt using a weapon called a Citan phase knife ended with the intended target simply absorbing the blade into his own body, a small, quiet detail that Imperial investigators now believe points to yet another active shard. Pulling strings somewhere inside human society itself, waiting for the right moment. The lesson embedded in every single one of the Deceiver's schemes is the same. The most dangerous Citan was never the one throwing fire. It's the one that convinced you to hand over the matches yourself. The Emperor of Mankind. 10,000 years ago, on a golden throne built to hold a god, a dying man was strapped in because there was nothing else anyone could do. He is still there. The Emperor of Mankind was born in ancient Anatolia at the dawn of human civilization, brought into existence when a circle of shamans sacrificed themselves in ritual suicide, their souls fusing together in the warp faster than the demons could devour them. That happened before Slaanesh even existed, back when the ruinous powers were still young. Across the following millennia, he became the single most powerful human psyker to ever live, and one of the rare immortal perpetuals who cannot die by ordinary means, capable of regenerating from wounds that would end any other living thing, human or otherwise. He personally hunted down and defeated a shard of the Void Dragon, sealing it beneath Mars. He engineered 20 superhuman sons, the Primarchs, and through them, the entire Adeptus Astartes, a feat of biomancy no other being in the setting has matched. Even confined to the Golden Throne, his mind never actually stops working. He still guides select psychers through the Emperor's Tarot, a divination tool tied directly to his will, and he can project fragments of his power outward to empower champions or manifest the ghostly legion of the damned when the need is desperate enough. But here's the part most people underestimate. Near the end of the Great Crusade, the Emperor defeated an ancient enemy and stood ready to claim their forbidden knowledge for himself. Annuncia, the primal language of chaos and creation itself. Wielding that knowledge would have made him something new, a being his own followers had already started calling the Dark King. One of his closest men, the perpetual Olanius Pius, was horrified enough by what his lord was becoming that he stabbed the Emperor and destroyed the tower rather than let him keep it. The Emperor let the power go. He went to face his rebellious son Horus as nothing more than a man, deliberately cutting away the last of his own paternal love, so grief wouldn't slow his hand, and the fight nearly killed him anyway. He won. He shattered Horus's soul so thoroughly the Chaos Gods couldn't even resurrect him, which is the kind of victory almost nothing else in this setting can claim. It cost him his body. What's left now sustains the Astronomicon, the beacon every ship in the Imperium needs to navigate the warp, and wages a psychic war against the ruinous powers that has not stopped for 10,000 years, fed in part by the deaths of 1,000 psychers every single day. To this day, the Imperium can't fully agree on whether he actually ascended to godhood in that final moment on the Golden Throne, or whether he remains, underneath 10,000 years of myth and Imperial cult worship, simply the most powerful man who ever lived. He is not a god by his own admission. He simply does everything a god would do permanently from a chair he can never leave. Slaanesh, one species, one night, 4 murdered gods. When the Aeldari Empire collapsed under the weight of its own excess, the psychic shockwave of that collapse gave birth to something new in the warp, and its first act, before it had even finished being born, was to start eating. Slaanesh's arrival tore open a permanent wound in reality that humanity would later call the Eye of Terror, a scar in the galaxy that has never healed and never will. Billions of Eldari died instantly, their souls swallowed whole, along with the Empire's most populous homeworlds and many of the very craft worlds built to escape the coming catastrophe. Then it turned on the gods that species had worshipped for millions of years. Vol, the smith god, who forged the legendary weapons the Eldari carried into every war before this one, gone. Lilith, goddess of dreams and fortune, gone. Morai Heg, keeper of fate, gone. Kurnos, the hunter, tried to warn the others, but Khaine had bound him with chains of fire out of old jealousy over a prophecy, so Slaanesh tore the hunter's perfect eyes from his skull, shattered them, and scattered the pieces across creation before finishing him off. When Isha, the mother goddess, fell beside her dying lover and Slaanesh moved to devour her too, Khaine himself charged in. Assyrian, king of that entire pantheon, could only watch and weep. His tears are still said to have crystallized into relics the Eldari carry today. Only 3 things survived that night. Segarak, the laughing god, escaped by hiding in the folds of the webway itself, the one god cunning enough to outrun a hungry newborn deity. Isha, goddess of life, was pulled to safety at the last second by the forces of Nurgle, who has kept her prisoner in his garden ever since. And Khaine, the god of war, fought Slaanesh directly and lived only because his opponent was too exhausted from consuming everyone else to finish the job, shattering him into pieces instead of erasing him outright. Sit with that for a second. Slaanesh is considered the youngest and, by most measures, the weakest of the 4 Chaos Gods. And in a single night, newly born, it walked through an entire alien pantheon and left 3 survivors. The Chaos Gods. If the weakest of the 4 could do that, ask yourself what the other 3 are capable of. Khorne, Tsenchi, Nurgle, and Slaanesh are not creatures that live in the warp. They are the warp given intention. Not one of them is technically alive in any sense a mortal would recognize, and not one of them has a fixed physical form the way an emperor or a Citan does. That's not a weakness, it's the reason nothing on this list has ever been able to permanently kill one. Every act of rage in the galaxy feeds Khorne. Every scheme, every twist of ambition feeds Tsin-Teach. Every plague, every slow collapse into despair feeds Nurgle. Every indulgence pushed past its limit feeds Slaanesh. They were not created once and left to exist. They are being created constantly by trillions of sentient minds across a galaxy that never stops fighting, hoping, suffering, and wanting. That is what makes them close to unkillable. You cannot starve a god whose food source is the full emotional range of every thinking creature alive. Each one has built an entire kingdom out of the emotion that feeds it. Khorne rules from a throne of bone and marrow on a mountain of skulls, a realm with no subtlety and no need for any. Tzeentch's domain is a labyrinth of shifting towers and impossible geometry, a place that is never the same shape twice, because change is the only constant its god allows. Nurgle's garden is a swamp of slow, patient decay where nothing ever truly dies, just endlessly rots and regrows, which he considers a gift. Slaanesh's realm is built entirely from temptation, a paradise engineered to feel perfect right up until it isn't. They hate each other almost as much as they hate everything else. Their endless internal struggle for dominance is called the Great Game, and it's the only reason reality hasn't been overrun already. The 4 ruinous powers spend nearly as much strength fighting one another as they do fighting everyone else. Khorne despises Slaanesh's indulgence as weakness dressed up as strength. Tzeentch and Nurgle are natural enemies too, change forever picking fights with stagnation. Their relative strength shifts with the tide of mortal feeling itself. Right now, in the grinding, rage-soaked wars of the 41st millennium, most agree that Khorne sits at the top of that hierarchy simply because violence is the easiest emotion in the galaxy to produce. But the ranking can turn. It always has before. Even beyond the big 4, there are smaller, stranger gods born the same way. Entities like Malice, who exist purely to hate the other 4 and answers to nobody, proof that the warp will keep manufacturing new horrors for as long as mortal minds keep giving it material to work with. And that's the detail that should actually unsettle you. Every faction on this list, from a resurrected bioweapon to a god locked on a throne, is playing a game with a fixed set of rules. The Chaos Gods don't have to win the fight in front of them. They just have to wait for the galaxy to keep feeling something, because as long as it does, they're already winning. Which of these beings do you think would come out on top in a straight fight? Drop it in the comments.